That's what I would like to say. Title and then go back. I don't want to really lie. Yeah. So you were able to edit these, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you edited same way this time and the next time I'll put it in the title. Yeah. All right. So that's what I'll
do. Welcome to Let's Talk with Dr. Robin. In this podcast, topics will be discussed that promote the daily management of life. While this information is meant to supplement your journey towards healthy emotional well-being, it is not intended to take the place of seeing a licensed mental health professional. I am Dr. Robin C. Wiley, a licensed clinical social worker with a private therapy practice in New Jersey. Thank you for joining today's conversation. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Let's Talk with Dr. Robin. This is Dr. Robin here with you this morning. And I'm, of course, joined by my producer with Four Walls Productions, Bryce. Hey, Bryce.
Hey, what's going on? How are you?
Good. So we are on a roll. We're like 1 week down. Next week, we're back.
Yeah.
Like I said, you know, the focus now and the commitment is to consistency in bringing this information to you. And one thing that we're doing is we're kind of redoing some of our shows that we did on Apple. We had our podcast is still on Apple, but some of the shows that we did like within the last year and a half. And so we're bringing those here to the YouTube channel. So certainly, please, share this and subscribe so that you can get weekly updates and you can be, in the know about, what Dr. Rob and myself, what I'm talking about.
That's correct. The world, let me tell you something. Honestly, the world needs to hear this. The world needs to hear you.
Well,
so I'm very excited. I'm very excited about this and about, hearing just them words of wisdom from you every week is going to be powerful. If it's powerful for me, I like to think it's going to be even more powerful for everybody else.
Thank you.
All right.
So today's episode is entitled, Are you considering therapy? So, and again, this is a remix of a former show that we did. And I think it was, worth a revisit because, there's been a lot going on and there's always a lot of stuff that's happening, whether it's happening internally for us or whether it's happening externally, things going on around in the world. And so sometimes we're at a place in life where, things are going on and we say, well, you know what, maybe I need to talk to somebody. And of course, being a therapist, I'm certainly going to promote therapy. I certainly believe in therapy. And so what I wanted to do today was to kind of debunk maybe some of the myths about therapy and maybe just talk about what to expect, from all the various aspects of therapy and how to approach it and that type of thing. Mm-hmm. So we're gonna dive right in. So let's start with what is therapy? What's the purpose? And we may know people who've gone to therapy. I think therapy is very much in right now.
Oh yeah, true.
It's on trend, as they say.
Indeed, yeah.
And maybe for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Because I think people just say, "Oh, I have a therapist. I'm talking to my therapist."
Yeah.
So it is something that I guess brings a little bit of maybe some, I don't know, gives you a little bit more street cred.
Yeah,
which I never thought would be the case, but
it's the street cred towards. Hey, listen, what did What did Will Smith say? I'm a work in progress.
Yes. And granted, we all are a work in progress. So whether you're using that as a soundbite or whether it is true, whatever it is, but yes. So therapy can be, it certainly is an outlet. You know, it's an outlet to be able to discuss things that are going on, things that may be bothering you, to be able to process things. And, you know, by things, it could be whatever. Like sometimes, you know, sometimes or most often, I would say, things have occurred in our life that, you know, maybe when we were younger or what have you, that we think, okay, you know what, I'm over that, or that's not really a big deal anymore, whatever. And then we start to, we think it's over. Yeah. And then, you know, we start to, as we get older, you know, as we maybe mature more, as we start to bring other things into our lives, we start to maybe notice patterns of behavior or patterns of thinking, you know, things that are maybe interfering, and we're trying to figure out, well, where is that coming from? Why am I still engaging in the same types of relationships with the same type of people? Or why do I keep maybe sabotaging myself? Or why am I not successful in these areas? And so, you know, sometimes at the recommendation of others, or we might read something, we might come across something that we listen to that suggests, well, maybe you should talk to somebody, talk to a therapist. So the thing to remember about a therapist, how it differs, because some people will say, well, why don't you just talk to your friends or your family? So I love it, right? He's like, So here's the difference between talking to a therapist. The main difference between talking to a therapist and talking to your friends or family is that a therapist is, you know, and I say this with caution, is an objective person.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is, is that your therapist doesn't know you, your family knows you, your friends know you. And so oftentimes our family and friends will come at us from the approach of what they think we should do. And that is with no formal training. That's just based on what they know about you, what they know about history, how they feel they may have approached things. And so that's not always objective in that they're biased, because they do have what you would call insider knowledge. So they know what you've done in the past. They know how you grew up. So they may bring up all of that stuff. And you're following advice based on not what might be the best thing for you, but what somebody else thinks you should do.
That part, as the young kids say, that part, absolutely. That, but I also think, in addition to that, I think is the objective piece like you talked, it's critical, because you don't know what condition their heart is in. That's the only. That's like, let's say, like,
and they may have some interests. Some other interest, they may have another agenda, you know, and that agenda may not be bad, but it may be that they feel like they know what's best for you. And so then they're giving you advice based on that. So a therapist, the difference with a therapist is that a therapist, first of all, is trained. This person has training. This person has years of experience. So they are bringing all of that knowledge to the table, in addition to some experiential knowledge of having worked with other clients. And so they are more objective because they don't know you. And so they don't have an agenda. They should not have a hidden agenda. And they were also guided by like a code of ethics. So the ethical behavior that we have to have means that we're not going to tell you exactly what you should do. We're not going to engage in a dual relationship with you. There's certain things that therapists are guided by that we just can't do. So
we're not supposed to do.
Well, are not supposed to do. Right. So granted, you know, so that's the reason why like a therapist can be helpful. And here's the other piece of this. Sometimes, you know, our conversations, you know, and this is not my quote, but I read this a few times. People go to therapy to deal with the people that won't go to therapy. And I think that is such a true statement, because oftentimes when people come in to talk to a therapist, they need to talk about relationships. They're talking about family situations, family dynamics, past and present, you know, talking about work situations and that type of thing and how to cope and all of that. So daily stressors. So being able to be just completely open and share whatever it is you want to talk about with somebody is very important in the therapeutic process. Yeah, it's vital. That's what helps us to be able to heal.
Yeah.
You know, we know we can't take away past things that have happened, whether it's
Right.
traumatic or what have you,
Right.
but we can process it so it's still not having an impact on our life today.
Right.
So that is a big part of the reason, a big part of the purpose of talking to a therapist. You know, and it doesn't have to be about like, you know, you don't have to be in crisis.
Right.
You know, I mean, certainly people may go to see a therapist if there's a major issue, but it doesn't even have to be a significant problem. Sometimes people go to see a therapist because of good things that are happening.
Right.
Because sometimes the good stuff scares us.
Right.
You know, it brings about some worry, some anxiety, some concern, you know, or it's things that are outside of our comfort zone.
Right.
So you can talk to a therapist about adjustments,
Yep.
about transitions. A lot of my work I do with some of my older clients are about transition from like, you know, working to retirement or transitioning through different stages of life in terms of aging.
Right.
Yes.
You know, it's funny that, you know, when I'm listening to you, it brings up, it's that statement. It's therapists, they shouldn't tell you what to do.
Right. Therapists don't give advice.
They don't give advice.
Yeah, they don't give advice.
Right. But
and we have to be cautious as a therapist. We have to be cautious when we're having those conversations.
That's the skill, though. I
because
think.
sometimes people, they want advice.
They want
like,
advice.
What do you think I should do?
Right.
And it's almost like you rephrase that. Well, what do you think you should do?
Right.
Or what are your options? Now, what therapists will do is they will help you to lay out all the options that you may have.
Right. Guiding you to whatever the best decision is.
So, and I use the word loosely, but it's like coach. It can be coaching.
Yeah.
But also therapist, right? I use that word loosely, right? But also, because there is an element of coaching to it, but there's also a part of where therapists help to create insight. You know, so sometimes what happens, I'm a strong believer that therapists, we're not the person or the individual that is creating the change. Yes, we are change. I think we are change conduits.
Right.
You know what I mean?
No,
We're the conduit for the change. Because people change because they want to.
Right.
What therapists do is therapists help you to maybe come to that decision.
Right.
And maybe help you to gain insight as to how certain things that you may be doing now are impacting your life in such a way that you don't want it to impact your life.
Right.
And then the change is necessary.
And what you need to do. The guidance of it.
Yes. But it's not like, oh, you should do this.
Right.
Or you should date this person.
And that's the difference.
It is a big
because
difference.
the friend
will say,
tell you, well, shoot, if it was me, I'd tell you, I wouldn't put up with that, or I wouldn't do that, blah, blah.
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean? Versus somebody like working through like solutions.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Possible options and that type of thing. And also, you know, therapists also, and you know, and I may be, you know, therapists will have a various backgrounds. Like some have backgrounds in counseling. You know, for me, my background is in social work. People have backgrounds in like psychology. You know, there's different types of the educational background that someone may have. But therapists will allow you also to make your own decisions. And in doing that, that also means that if you're trying to make a decision that is not the best for you, a therapist is not going to say, wait, don't do that.
Right.
That's not a therapist's role.
No.
Because you are entitled
to do whatever you want to do.
Now, where a therapist does where the line is kind of like crosses if you are threatening to harm yourself or harm somebody else. The therapists are mandated. Counselors and therapists are mandated to assist in, you know, interventions to prevent that. Right.
I love this term. And a friend of mine taught me this term. Be mindful. So that's my way of not telling somebody what to do. So let's say I'm a therapist, right? And, you know, kids come to me and say, yeah, Bryce, you know, I'm telling you, I'm going to get this money, man. I'm out here hustling. I'm up right now. I'm up. I say, okay, that's what's up. I said, but just be mindful that this type of activity produces these results.
Right.
So I can't tell you what not to do.
Exactly.
But I'm going to let you know all the different consequences that may come with good, bad, or indifferent.
And that's increasing somebody's insight because, you know, we talked about this last week, like, you know, people may act impulsively about and make a decision, you know, and so if you're in that role of, you know, someone who is in this person's confidence, in a sense, like where this person will talk to you for whatever reason, then yes, you want to be able to address the issue at hand. So, so the other thing too is I do want to stress that, you know, because people still associate like, oh, I'm going to, you know, to talk to a therapist. You know, I don't want people to think I'm crazy or whatever.
Yeah,
you know, that's. And I say
that's an
this
old
because
stigma too,
it is an old statement, but you still hear it, you know, and I think people are, you know, even in the world that we live in where mental health is a little bit, I would say a lot more at the forefront now of discussions, and people are, you know, very much versed on therapy because you can look online and you can see all types of things. You know, people are very much, you know, almost like ready to diagnose themselves because, you know, they've read something online. And what is the phrase? It's like, you know, don't let your, you know, your Google search does not, you know, does not like outweigh or something like that my MSW degree or whatever my therapist.
I like that.
Right. Because, you know, because people will Google search something and come in, I think I'm this, you know, so, but you don't have to be, or nor is anybody, you know, quote unquote crazy, you know, and yes, we don't use that term in the professional world.
Absolutely.
But, you know, to have to talk to somebody, you know, I think it certainly is. You know, I think it's brave for someone to want to, especially at certain ages that they may be at, to come in and to want to talk about things that have occurred in their past and to be able to want to work on things, because that's part of growth. That's part of evolution, you know, that we don't get to a stage. We don't get to a certain age, you know, maybe 100 is the age, but we don't get to a certain age where we're like, oh yeah, I don't have to work on anything, or I'm great.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't have to work on a thing.
I've arrived. Yes. I'm done.
We are, even when you have arrived, quote unquote, in whatever area of life, we still have to work on things because newness, change, all that stuff, it brings up stuff for us. So think of therapy as a form of self-care. You know, it's a form of self-care. As we think of self-care as like, oh, I went and got my nails done, or I'm getting my hair done, or I went on a vacation. Therapy is a form of self-care where you have this opportunity on a weekly or bi-weekly basis or whatever to be able to just kind of unpack some stuff with someone and to get some feedback. And
that's the greatest benefit, the unpacking.
Yeah, the unpacking. I don't think we give enough credence to unpacking and how important that is. Yeah, like unpacking something, whether it's past or present, really helps us to be able to process. And our brain, we need to process stuff. So then we can be aware of whether our beliefs and our thoughts about it are irrational versus irrational, whether we are maybe misreading something. And so a therapist gives that feedback to you and helps you with that process. You know, so that the thoughts are not, and strategies. So, which we'll get into that in a second. But the other thing too is that
sounds a little bit like spring cleaning. I don't know.
It can be spring cleaning for the mind.
I like.
We're in spring. Are we in spring? Kind of.
I don't know.
A little bit.
I saw a fly.
My allergies say
right, absolutely.
But the weather outside is not necessarily saying it. So the other thing too is one thing I do want to say, and I say this, you know, as a therapist. Understand this. Therapy can be challenging.
Yes.
And it's not always going to be comfortable. So here, and this goes back to what I was saying where therapy is on trend. You know, I say, you know, people want a therapist. They want to, you know, like, I got a therapist. I see my therapist every week. People want to say that. But sometimes people are not always ready for the challenging part of therapy, which is, you know, a good therapist is going to challenge you. And that means they're going to challenge you to talk about things when you're ready that you may not have talked about, that may not be comfortable. There may be moments in therapy where therapy is not comfortable. Right. You know, and what I mean by that is we're just talking about topics that are uncomfortable, or we're processing things that are uncomfortable. Right. It's like, you know, climbing a hill, going up, it's hard. Right. It can be tough at times. Right. You may want to give up. You may want to, and so in therapy, you may want to say, I don't want to see the therapist anymore, or I need a break. Right. And a good therapist will recognize that and pull back in terms of not pushing issues or pushing you to discuss something that you're not ready to talk about. Right. But just like going up that hill, when you reach the top, you know, you feel a sense of accomplishment. Yeah. And so sometimes we have to get on the other side of those tough topics. Yeah. You know, and then you feel like you've accomplished something, and you've built up something within yourself. You've built up some resiliency, some coping, and that can help you. And it also is about the long game here. Yeah. Therapy is about the long game. You know, people will come into therapy that first session, you know, kind of unpack a lot and lay it all out on the table and feel
my life has changed.
Yes, and feel euphoric, feel awesome.
I love my new therapist. He's so good.
Yes, and here's I love.
You know, that's what they say. Oh my God! Oh my God! I've been praying.
You're like
for
my
you.
backup singer. I love it because that is it. That is absolutely what happens. Yes, like
all my life.
this has been fantastic. And then
that's right.
They realize because they're like, oh, I think I'm good now because I saw you that one time. I think I'm great.
Right.
Then they realize nothing has really changed in your life.
Same
You've
thing.
you've just like laid it all out there on the table. You've unleashed it, which is good. So that's kind of something that happens that's common. People will have that first session. You know, they feel fantastic because they got all this stuff off their chest.
Good.
And then they realize, then the work begins. And it is work. Therapy is work. Yep. So just keep that in mind. It can be challenging. It may be not always comfortable. A good therapist is not going to agree with everything you're saying. And I say that as I consider myself a good therapist.
Yes.
And I know that I'm not the therapist for everybody. Yes. Because I am going to challenge my clients, you know what I mean? And I have clients that, have been around for a while and keep coming back. And I get a lot of, clients that want to see me. And I think that because a good therapist is trying to help you to get where you need to be, where you want to be. Right.
Which I think that is for everybody. I just don't know if everybody is accepting of it.
Well, right. And that's the thing. And sometimes, people will feel like they're ready to see a therapist, but then they get into it and they're like, oh, no, I wasn't ready.
You know what I realized, though? And this is just with living and maybe because I think with being a therapist, like you have to be in tune with just life, like the process of life and how life is a long game, right? It's a process, right? Yeah. So oftentimes I'll say, I can tell you what you probably need to do, but that won't be beneficial to you, right? Because that's you not knowing it,
right? And you're not coming to it on your own.
You got it right. So then
you want somebody to come to it on their own.
That's when therapy is really optimized, right? When what I'm saying is now also meeting with your maturation or your process of receiving.
Right. And we have a friend in here who also wants to do therapy with us.
That's showing this spring, right?
A bee. I don't think it's a bee. I think it's like a fly or something. Okay, we're about to have a moment. Though. Yeah, let's just let it go. Yeah, it does look a little bee-ish.
It looks a little bee-ish, though.
I love that we've coined a new phrase, bee-ish.
Bee-ish.
Yes, it does. But we're gonna leave it be because
my swatter.
Well, we don't want to do that here because I think we might get some other. We don't need anybody from. I don't know that it would be PETA, but we don't want anybody being like, well, wait a minute. We don't
want the cousin.
Yes, the cousin. They killed a live.
Right.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah,
y'all did my bee like that. Y'all did my homie like that.
Yes. So. All right. So we digress for a second here, but okay. So the thing is you are really, a therapist, like I said, I like the idea of a change conduit. Like, you are trying to work with someone, and it's also, we always say in my field, like, meeting people where they are. And that's important because everybody's not ready to talk about everything, immediately. Sometimes people, they want to work on this area, but they don't want to work on, the other stuff that might be the bigger picture. And all of that's okay. A therapist will ride with you.
Sure.
You know what I mean? They will make some moves to challenge you here and there. And if you're not ready, they will pull back, and I say this as a therapist. And I say this also, I do clinical supervision with people who are in the process of becoming therapists, or becoming like clinically licensed therapists. And, sometimes, that is a struggle when we're new in the field and we're like, well, wait a minute, this person probably needs to be doing this, and that, but they just don't seem to connect with that. And it's like, you just got to ride with it.
Right.
So, okay. So we move on to how can it be helpful? So, we got the purpose of therapy and I kind of delve in a little bit about how it can be helpful. But one of the other things too is, it's can help us to like that processing of past experiences. So there's a lot of times when our stuff from the past, it continues to impact us. And I said this a few minutes ago, like, it continues to kind of live in our life today when it happened, 15, 20, 30 years ago, whatever. And so, but therapy can also, talking to a therapist can also help us to, be able to make decisions, be able to make changes, be able to process feelings, things that, we feel like we need to do, whether that's, like I said, it doesn't always have to be about some negative stuff is going on. Sometimes people just are like, look, I have no other way I have no other outlet to be able to talk about stuff that's bothering me.
Right.
And the therapist will afford you that opportunity.
Right.
So what's the process? Because here's the thing too, and what's the process of getting a therapist? And I think, sometimes that can seem a little convoluted. It can seem, complicated in a sense of, well, where do I find a therapist and how do I know who's a good therapist and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to kind of delve into that for a little bit before we get into what to expect from your first session and then, how to make therapy be good, for you, so to speak. So what you need to bring to the table as the client. So the process. So one of the things is before you probably, or while you're making this decision, you also want to think about like, what are your preferences for a therapist? Like what, whether it's about race and ethnicity. Certainly I see a lot of individuals that come into my private practice and group practice that they want to see a person of color. And, there's nothing wrong with that. Because, there is research that shows and we just know sometimes we do feel more comfortable talking to somebody who will have some insight to our experience. And we know that people of color have a different experience
than somebody that's
than our Caucasian counterparts. Also too, thinking about the specialty, like what are you maybe coming into therapy for? Because the therapist that you're talking to when you call to set up that appointment or what have you, they're going to ask you that. They're going to ask you, well, what are you coming in for? So, if it's like, you're dealing with anxiety, dealing with some stress or family issues or whatever, just in general, because you're going to delve more into that during that first session.
That's true.
Also too, now, a big thing is whether you want to do in-person or telehealth. Some people really want in-person. Most people are fine with telehealth because it offers you an opportunity to now not have to drive through traffic to get to their appointment, or it allows you to be able to have different hours. Or the other thing is, like we're in the state of New Jersey, so it allows people from all across the state of New Jersey to now see a therapist
at any given time.
And in a different location than they are.
At any given time.
So they don't have to drive an hour and a half. They can, see this therapist that they want. And so that's those are things to consider.
And you could be more creative. You could be creative. So I'm saying you can be more creative too.
Right. So it definitely will work a lot of times for people's schedules. Absolutely.
The connection part, did you?
The connection part too, and that I get into that in a minute because the other thing is about like understanding that therapists are people too.
Right.
So like the connection is important. It is, and I've talked to people who have called me for therapy or to come into the group practice, and they've talked about some negative experiences they've had with other therapists, and they have actually like stayed around with that therapist. And I'm like, but you don't want to stay because you're not doing that. Because here's the thing: if I'm not good as a therapist, somebody tell me. Let me know. So then I can be, because
I can be better.
So I can be better.
That's what I was just thinking about.
Because and I'll tell you two of the, I would say like one, maybe the other one will come to mind, but one of the biggest issues that I've heard people talk about with therapists is the idea that the therapist is just letting me talk. They're not giving me any kind of strategies. They're not giving me any kind of feedback. I'm just talking. And so I feel like and this is from, clients, like every week I'm just talking and they're not giving me anything. And the thing is people, therapy in the past, and when I say past, I mean decades ago, was about you come in, you lay on the couch, you know just what I mean? And the therapist is sitting there in the nice chair with their notebook and you're talking and they're just writing down stuff.
That's it.
That is not how therapy is done nowadays. And I hope any therapist out there that's how you're doing it. I need you to take a CEU or something. But I think most therapists, that's not how it's done. People come into therapy because we're so more knowledgeable about what therapy should be. So there's articles, there's podcasts, there's all kinds of stuff on there about like what you need, what you should be getting from your therapist. So therapy now, and hopefully I would say within the last, more recent decades is, you're coming in, yes, you're talking about stuff because you do need to give the therapist something to work with, but therapists are giving you knowledge. They're presenting you with information. And that's key. Because what are you paying for? What are you doing it for? Yeah, if you're just talking and then leaving.
But I'll say like, see, when people say, oh, well, my experience with let's say with me, right? All my experience with Bryce just wasn't good. I'm having a better experience over there, right? So I do self-reflect on that. But at the same time, sometimes, again, it always has to deal with that person, I think.
Well, it's a mutual relationship.
Right, okay.
And I will get into that in a second, because it is a mutual relationship. So there is a give and take. Right. Just like any relationship, communication is key. That back and forth, what you're putting, and that's why I say, like, you do need to give the therapist something to work with. And so, and if you're not ready to talk about stuff, then you need to say that, but then also understanding that, if you're saying I'm coming into therapy to work on stress, but then when the therapist is saying, well, what stresses you out? You're like, well, I don't really know.
I don't know.
Then that kind of like, okay, well, where do we go from here?
Right.
So those are all things to consider.
Right.
So, all right. So the other thing is thinking about like places to find a therapist. I mean, certainly, Psychology Today, Black therapists, Black therapy for girls is another one. There's a bunch of different sites, Black Therapist Rock. I think there's a list there too.
Right.
I think it's Black Therapist Rock. I'm not misspeaking on that, but there's a bunch of different websites where you can find therapists and you can put in your preferences.
Really? Okay.
So that's always good.
Okay.
But here's another thing to think about, on the side of like, how will you pay for therapy? Therapy is typically not free.
Oh, right.
You know what I mean? And can cost a lot. And there are many therapists that take private insurance, but there are a lot of therapists that don't take insurance, just private pay.
Right.
And therapy, depending on where you live and all that kind of stuff, can range, I would say, literally from at least $100 and up to $200, $250.
That's right.
You know what I mean? I'm sure, like I said, depends on the state you're in, location, all that kind of stuff. But in terms of insurance, you need to understand your insurance. You need to know what insurance covers. And I find that too, that a lot of times people, they don't know about their insurance. They don't know whether they have a deductible. Right. Which means that, you're going to have to pay out of pocket and then it's billed to your insurance and that applies to your deductible. Right. Or what their copay is, which means your insurance pays part of the session and you pay a copay that sometimes could be anywhere from $5 up to like $50 or what have you. Right. So those are important things for you to know, because sometimes people, I say they get priced out of therapy. They can't afford the copay or they can't afford to pay out of pocket. Right. And so, sometimes that can be a concern, and so it's good to know what your insurance covers. And, you find that out just by calling your insurance and asking them. And especially if like you may be on your parents' insurance, for some of our younger folks, maybe on their parents' insurance. And then, just to know
how many sessions you're allowed. I think
which isn't so much an issue now.
Oh, really? That's changed?
That has changed over the years. Maybe a couple of plans, because it's also, there's your insurance and there's the plan that you have under your insurance. And we know that that's a whole other thing. Right. But knowing what your insurance covers, that's important, so that you know what the cost may be for you.
For you out of pocket.
Right. Because you don't want to get connected with a therapist and then you're like, oh, wait a minute.
I have no money. Right.
And understanding that in the case of insurance, deductibles start every year. They start over.
Oh,
so
right,
you may meet your deductible at some point, but then it kicks in again most of the time in January. Right. And now we have where people who, insurance companies were covering telehealth, some are no longer covering telehealth. Well, I won't say that they're covering telehealth, but they may be your copays have kicked back in, or your deductibles have kicked back in. Right. So, and understanding too that, a lot of therapists are not business people. So the therapist is like, okay, I do the therapy, I bill, and then they will just send that bill on to you about your insurance. So, and I think over the years, like I've become more versed in, billing and that kind of stuff. And, but as my practice has grown and the group practice has grown, I have a billing manager. Wow. Shout out to Karan, my billing manager.
Hey, Karan.
Karan, Karan is my billing manager. She is amazing.
All right.
And, she really is. She gets, and that's a big job, for somebody to do. But that's the other side of this, it being in communication with clients about what their insurance is. It's a lot to it on our end. Right. So. And
balancing all of that stuff, I think, is critical.
Which is a whole look. That's a show for another day. How to balance it all. Yes. But so when you get on the phone, when you find your therapist and you get on the phone with this person, there's some questions to ask. Certainly, and some people will do a consultation, like they will a therapist will give a consultation, which is like a few minutes just to kind of, maybe talk about their methodology, how they approach therapy, what types of techniques they use,
right.
And an opportunity for you to ask questions to see if there's like a little bit of an introductory of, and if there's any rapport there. Or
here's what you can expect of me.
Right.
This is my baseline.
Right.
Right.
And typically, they'll talk about some insurance, so they'll talk about, consent forms, policies, that kind of thing too.
Yeah.
But some questions for you to ask is, what is your therapist? What's the therapist process? Like, how do they approach therapy?
Right.
Specialty areas, like, making sure that they specialize in what you're coming in for. If you're coming in to deal with grief, and the therapist is like, which I don't think most therapists do, but I don't think any therapist would say this, but like, oh, I don't really deal with grief.
Right.
Then, that's probably not a therapist you want to see, because if that's what you're coming in for, because this is your opportunity to ask them stuff, what I mean? Or, or
just
even
let them
about
know,
what
your expectations are.
Right. Or if you need flexibility in your schedule, like some people, because of their work schedule, their work hours are different.
Right.
So they need a little flexibility.
Right.
Most therapists, I can't speak for all, but most therapists, like if your appointment is 5 o'clock on Wednesdays, your appointment is 5 o'clock
on Wednesday. Right.
So, right. That's usually how it is. I think some therapists, I know myself, I am always running a few minutes behind. My shout out to any of my clients that are listening.
I learned to do.
They know. They're like, okay, I know I got 10 minutes because Dr. Robin is going to be 10 minutes behind.
But you know what? It's almost like going to the doctor. Like, I don't know if I've ever been to the doctor where like my appointment is 3:45 and I went in and saw the doctor at 3:45. So it's like a range.
Because I'm gonna tell you what happens. But what happens is, and I've explained this to you, what happens is you start out maybe on time. If you got
somebody, right, but something goes off schedule, right.
And also too, a good therapist, like if you are, therapy is, this is a therapeutic environment. You're creating space. Therapists create space for people to be able to talk about very significant, important issues.
Sure.
So those issues can also bring about a lot of emotion and emotional responses. So if I have a client who is talking about something important to them and they start crying, or they're just just deep in conversation, I'm giving those warnings of like, oh, we've got a few more minutes.
Right.
You know what I mean? But I'm not going to stop them and say, oh, you know what? I know you're going through this emotional thing.
That's our time.
Yeah, that's our time for today. And then click up and I go on to the next client. No. So over the course of time, there are things that will kind of
adjust,
cause that little bit of a gap where somebody may be less on time. So yes, so those are some things to ask. I'm sure there's other questions, but you don't want to get too much into the therapist's personal, because it's not our job.
It's not about it's not about that,
right? But sometimes if somebody's having their child come in, they may say, well, do you have children or what have you? That kind of thing. All right, so now you found your therapist. Okay, so now you get into that first session. Okay. And that first session is, an intake session. It's really like it's the assessment is beginning.
Yeah.
And so they're asking, there's questions. You're talking about, why you're coming in. You're discussing presenting issues. And this is where, it's going to be key because, you've got to share. You've got to share information. And it doesn't mean you don't have to tell your entire life story. It's not about that. No, it's not about telling everything.
Not all in that one time.
Yeah, I usually explain it. Like people who haven't gone to therapy before, I explain to them in that introductory, like that conversation before we've scheduled about, what to expect. We're going to be talking about, various things that have been going on. I'm going to ask some questions. I want you to talk about whatever you feel comfortable talking about, but I'm going to be asking some questions to sort of fill in the missing pieces.
Right.
And I assure them, you don't have to tell me everything in this first session because we have time.
Right.
Because sometimes, it's so much that people have been going through and they don't know where to begin. I hear that often. People are like, I don't know where to begin.
Right.
And it's like, well, just begin wherever and we'll just start and we'll fill in as we're going along.
Right.
So, so think about, when I think about expectations, because, I'm very big about the expectations of your therapist, but also to be open about what you may need from your therapist. And I've had people, or if you have other experiences with other therapists, I know when I always ask somebody, I always ask them, like, have you been to a therapist before? And if they say, yes, I have, I'm like, well, tell me, what was that experience like for you?
Right.
And if they've had a negative experience, I want to hear about that because I want to make sure that, we're not doing the same thing
Jay did, right?
Right, exactly. So be open about that. You know, if you've had some, and I find that people are a lot more, because even a lot more open, but because even though your therapist is the quote unquote expert, you know, in their area, they should be, you know, they should be well versed, but you're the expert on you and what you need. So you have to be vocal about that. So that kind of leads me into, you know, what you will need to bring to the table, you know, as the client, you know, be open, you know, definitely being open to sharing, understanding that you got to give the information to be able to receive the feedback. Again, you don't need to tell everything at once, but you do need to share. Don't be afraid, again, to tell the therapist, you know, what you're looking for in therapy.
Right.
And understand that may change. So that's not set in stone.
Right.
You know, that may change.
Yeah, right. It may start out one thing.
Right.
And then as you're growing, because you should be growing in therapy,
it changes.
Then, you know, you have different needs or whatever.
Exactly.
So, you know, those are good things.
So think about it like, you know, whether that's you need tasks, whether you want homework assignments, whether you need strategies, whether you want feedback, you know, or for some, and I see this with some of, you know, some people in different age demographics, is that they just want the support. They want to have somebody to be able to talk about stuff. They don't really, they may feel like, okay, you know, I'm not really looking for things to necessarily change because things are kind of set, but I just want to be able to have an outlet to be able to talk about stuff. Right. So that's supportive counseling. Sometimes people just want to be supported in whatever they're trying to do. Keep in mind, and this goes back to what we were talking about before, that this is a mutual relationship.
Yes.
It takes two in this relationship
to make it work,
to change.
Yes.
Right. For change to happen.
Right.
Okay.
I got to do my job.
Right. I can, you know, therapists, or I was like to say, but therapists can be given strategies and given work. For therapy work is not just done in the session. Work in therapy is done outside of the session. So you might get some little nuggets of information or some strategies, and then you've got to apply them outside. Right. You know, and if you don't apply them outside, then it's like, and what I mean by that is like outside of the session. Right. Like, you know, when you go to your day-to-day before the next week, whatever you guys have talked about, you've got to work on that. Right. If you don't work on it, or if you don't apply it, then maybe things may not change as quick as you want them to, or they may not change at all.
Or like I said, you know, I look at people say, well, what are you going to do for me? I said, listen, I'm just a farmer. Okay.
Right. Planting. I'm planting.
I'm just planting.
Right.
Now, you know, I'm hoping that it's your season to harvest.
Okay. I like that.
But I'm hoping.
Right.
But if it's not,
maybe it'll be the season next time.
It'll be soon.
Yes.
Because what I'm saying to you, I know is what is my seeds to you. That this is
right.
You know what I'm saying? So I don't.
And that's the thing, is that therapists are doing that. We're planting.
Just planting seeds. That's what I'm doing.
And you know, we're, like I said, that change conduit. You know, we're that connection between you and change. But the work that needs to happen is, and the therapist has to do work. There's work on the part of the therapist in terms of we're bringing in our knowledge and skills, you know, to help you to gain some insight and that type of thing. Yeah. But there's also work on the part of the client. Yeah. And that mutual, and sometimes, you know, that relationship with a therapist, that's a significant relationship. Sure. You know, it is. And good therapists hold that relationship very sacred. So, you know, so there is that opportunity because sometimes, you know, people can be in therapy off and on for a while. Right. And that doesn't mean that there's bad stuff going on. Because sometimes people are like, oh, you know, well, how long do I have? How many sessions do I have to have? And it's like, well, you can have as many sessions as you want to have. Right. But, you know, sometimes people, once they have achieved things, they want to maintain that achievement. Right, absolutely. Or they realize, okay, you know what, I've conquered this and this is okay. Right. But now there's some other stuff that's coming up. So I think now I'm ready to deal with this. So you go back to, you go. Right. Like, you know what, a good therapist, you will always remember. Yes. And I've always said this to somebody: if I'm your therapist, I'm always your therapist. Right. So I always say that because I love that. Because people, but you know, like when my schedule is full, I'm like, you know, seeing clients at like 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night. But the thing is, you know, because that connection with somebody, and people don't always want to just start that connection all over again. Right. But also too, sometimes in therapy, you know, you've gotten all you can get out of your therapist, so then you may want a different therapist. To work on something, or a therapist with a different specialty area or whatever. So I do feel like, you know, keeping in mind that, you know, therapy can be a fantastic part of your self-care routine. Yep. You know, so of course I encourage it. And, it's about finding the right person, and it's about knowing, what you're coming in for at that time. And it also is about the work and the understanding that it's not always going to be comfortable for you. Like I said, sometimes it may be a little uncomfortable, but the therapist is there. They're working in partnership with you to help you overcome those hurdles. Okay.
A good therapist is one that could just like you said, the objective honesty.
Right. They're objective. Right. They're going to be honest with you. Whether challenge what is needed.
Whether it may hurt your, like I always say, there's two types of love, right? There's the tender love, and then there's the tough love, but it's still under love. So again, I'm just always, there go that word, I'm mindful. Right. Be mindful. Yes. Always just being mindful. I think, just because I've been on the other side of it, right? At one point, and like I said, a good therapist, you'll remember, because they've left you nuggets, or they've left you, seeds that.
And a therapist is there. I mean, I don't necessarily promote this because I know all therapists don't do this, but I know, like, I'm someone who, my clients, if something major is going on, like, because we're in a different day of technology, where, a client may text me, this is going on or what have you, or they may call me and say, look, can I get a session earlier because something is happening or whatever, and I, make myself available for that.
Right.
And some might say that, oh, well, that's not boundaries, that's that. But to me, the relationship with your therapist, that therapeutic relationship is so tender.
Yes.
And it is, and it is one that is significant in that person's life.
Yeah.
And I know sometimes we're working with people that they don't have a vast support system.
Right.
And even if they do, that's not who they would go to talk about certain issues. So I do feel like, within reason. Right. And I haven't had clients to ever abuse that, or I haven't had clients to, cross the boundaries in that type of sense. So, so I feel over the years, and I've been doing this, like, I've been in the field for, like, I just realized, a while back, maybe a couple of weeks ago, I was like, this is my 27th year. In the field. I know. Yes. I started when I was just a baby.
Wow.
So, and over half of that career has been as a therapist.
Right.
So over those years, I've met some really wonderful people, and it is very much, joyful work.
Yeah.
It's not always the easiest work. No, it's not.
No.
And for therapists, we have to manage our own self-care, and and oftentimes we need to talk to our own therapist to process things or what have you, because we're human too. So, but I leave you with the understanding that therapy can be, again, a part of your self-care routine, a part of a key element in helping you to get from a point in your life, or to get through some issues that may be going on, and to get to a place that you're functioning at optimal level. And so that's what I leave you with today. I hope everybody has a good week coming up. Certainly, share, this YouTube episode, and subscribe to us, so we can, you can be up to date on the content that we're bringing you. And until next time, be well, be great, and be you.